I've got one of the largest dual cab utes you can buy here in Australia. This is the Ford F-150 Lariat long wheel base, and I'm here to answer the simple question, why would you buy one of these? But before I answer that question, make sure you go to productreview.com.au because there you're going to be able to read reviews of people who've bought and owned cars like the Ford F-150. And if you want to tell people what it's like to own your car, you can leave a review there as well. Now, for those of you watching, you know the F-150 is a long way from home. These aren't actually manufactured in right-hand drive because here in Australia, this is the side we drive on. What Ford have decided to do is import a bunch of these, convert them here locally, and then sell them against cars like the Dodge Ram and the Chevy Silverado. And that's because Aussies have developed an appetite for utes like this. Now, how much does it cost? Well, it's going to cost you over $100,000 just to even get an F-150 with cloth seats and a short wheelbase. That's called the XLT model. But this is the top of the range Ford F-150 Lariat, which has got the long wheelbase, so it gets a longer bed and a longer wheelbase, and that means it's going to cost you over $140,000 here in Australia, so around $150,000 once you pay all your taxes. I've been living with the F-150 for nearly a week, and I'm going to tell you what it's like to live with in the city, how much fuel it uses, what it's like to drive. But first of all, let's talk about what features you get when you spend $150,000 on a big pickup like this here in Australia. Now, Ford explained to me that the Lariat is meant to be the combination between work and play, meaning that it's going to have the most amount of features that Ford Australia will throw at you when you buy an F-150 Lariat. So you're getting chrome up the top here, which is plastic, but you're actually getting real chrome bumpers down below. You're getting a giant Ford logo here with a camera there for your 360-degree parking camera. Now, this rapid red paint, which I absolutely adore, will only cost an extra $700, but it is a premium paint. Now, you are getting some tow hitch points down below on both sides, so you can imagine this being able to pull out some stuck cars, or if you get stuck yourself, you can use those to pull this out. And you're also getting some skid plates underneath just for a bit of extra protection. Now, in photos, I wasn't a big fan of these 20-inch chrome wheels, but in person with this red paint, I think they are some of the best looking wheels I've seen on any truck ever. They just look so good in person, especially with these chrome bumpers. Now, you can see here why it's called the long wheelbase. So the standard F-150 wheelbase is 3,683 millimeters, which is 145 inches. Now, the long wheelbase extends it out to 3,987 millimeters, which is 157 inches. And that means the length of your bed goes from 5.5 feet to 6.5 feet. But some other features along the side here include these power folding mirrors with blind spot monitoring, and they also have a camera here on the side. You've also got keyless locking and unlocking and also remote start. And you also do have a 4x4 sticker here at the back and also a pretty sick looking exhaust pipe that comes out the rear here. And you'll also notice these reflectors which have been stuck on the side here and also up here on the driver's side door, which is reflected on the other side to help people see this really long car when it's doing a 4-point turn in the middle of a suburban street. Now, this car comes with Pirelli all-terrain tires, which means it had pretty much no issues coming up here on this grassy knoll. And you've also got a leaf spring suspension setup here at the rear with a shock absorber to help with the ride quality. Now, you're still going to fit in underground car parks because this only is 1,995 millimeters tall, which is less than some 2-meter clearances that those car parks have. But I will say the length of this truck makes it very hard to park inside any underground structures. And also you have these little pieces here which should scratch first before you hit that very expensive roof in case you misjudge your clearances. Now, I think this is a first here in Australia, but you guys in America have had this for a while. This little passkey code you have here on the door is actually something that's been available in America for a long time, which means you don't actually need your key on you to lock and unlock your car, which is great if you go to the beach or anything like that you don't want to carry your key with you. But we get it here on the F-150, but we haven't had it on any other Fords sold here in Australia. Now, so far, you just like the look of this truck, and there hasn't been any real reason for you to go and buy one of these instead of a normal dual cab ute. But here is the main reason. The F-150 can tow up to 4.5 ton, where regular dual cab utes here in Australia are rated for around 3.5 ton. So you get a 1 ton advantage if you buy an F-150 over a regular dual cab ute. But what else is different back here is that you do get a power tailgate, which is pretty luxurious. And it will also help you close it when you lift it up, and it'll pick up the rest of the slack. Now, you've also got some connections here for your braked trailer controls and also a little area to feed wires through or any cables, and you do get an actual spare tire underneath and some very real metal bumpers. Now, opening this up, you might think, how do I get in the back? This is quite high off the ground. Well, Ford has a solution for you. You press this button here and your step comes out. But you go, well, that looks a bit scary. I have nothing to hold on to. Well, Ford thought of that too with this pole, you simply step here in the middle and you're in the bed of your ute, which is very clever and a very elegant way to get here in the back. And getting down is pretty easy as well. Now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, because the long wheelbase F-150 can only put a payload in the back of 710 kilograms. Now that's a lot, but it's not as much as I would have expected for a big truck like this. Now, unfortunately, I didn't go to the launch of the F-150, so I don't really have any direct answers as to why it can only carry 700 kilograms as a payload here in the back. But what I can tell you is how big it is. So the tray here is 543 millimeters in height, 2005 millimeters in length, and 1,285 millimeters wide between the wheels here. Now we're getting a spray-in bed liner, which means you can throw anything you want back here and it's not going to damage the paint of this car. You've also got some nice tie-down points here, plenty of lights here in the back, but unfortunately here in Australia, we don't get any sort of AC adapters for actual household plugs. Instead, we only get a lousy 12-volt connector. But yes, you do get a window that opens in the back here to feed more air to the back seats, or just being able to grab things out of the back from the back seats. Now this area back here makes for a great workbench because it has areas to clamp down any sort of pieces of wood you might want to put here at the back, or any materials you might want to clamp down. You have a point here and one on the other side. You have an actual measurement tape in inches and centimeters, and you do have an area to put your cup so it doesn't roll around or move around that easily. So it has a little cup holder, and also what's cool is you get these little divots here which fit a phone perfectly if you're watching a YouTube tutorial on how to do that job you're doing. Now this button on the inside isn't to bring up the automatic tailgate, but instead you can turn on the bed lights from the back here, which is really quite useful. And you have two on the inside and two up top, which makes for a very illuminated space at night. Now it's important to note that the GVM of the F-150 long wheelbase is 3,265 kilograms. So that's 3.2 ton, and that can actually exceed some GVM ratings of some back roads here in Sydney, which you have to be careful of if you don't want to be caught out on a technicality. But the actual curb weight, this thing is only 2.5 ton, 2,555 kilos to be exact. Now here in Sydney, we also have a length restriction of some streets of 6 meters or longer, but don't worry, this is only 5.8 meters long. In terms of fuel, this is where you're going to fill up here at the back. It's going to take petrol, of course, and it can even feed E10, so it's not too precious on what sort of fuel you put here in the back. But you might want to do your weekly budget if you are filling this up from empty, because it has a 136 litre tank, which will take you over 1,000 kilometers if you're out on the highway. Now here's another reason why you might buy a Ford F-150 instead of something like a Ford Ranger. It's because you get so much more space here in the back seats. We get heated seats in the back in this Lariat model. We can see some nice wood look trim and some stitching into the doors. We also get Bang & Olufsen speakers here in the back, but we do get lots of knee room, lots of feet room, and a decent amount of headroom. And that's me as a 5'11" adult. If you're a bit taller, you still will have a lot of room, but if you're taller than that, you might find the headroom to be a little bit restricted. There's also loads of storage here in the doors, in front, in these seat pockets, and also some cup holders here in the back. The middle seat is also very comfortable, so you can put 3 adults in the back very comfortably for reasonably long trips, but you do get some USB ports in the back. One's a USB Type A, and the other is a USB Type C. And you're also getting a 12-volt socket in the rear as well. And of course, you are getting this brilliant large glass roof, which can open. And of course, you do get your own rear window here in the back, which the driver can open and close for you. And if you don't have someone in the middle seat, you have more cup holders here in the center armrest. But for long trips, you absolutely want the back seats. They're so comfortable. You're going to likely be using the rear seats as a boot because there is no tonneau cover or cover that comes with the F-150 as standard. So instead, what you need to do is you can either fold these seats down just like this, and so you can get a nice flat area up top and also access your tools to change your tire. But this isn't very practical. Instead, what's easier is you can actually pull up the bottom here, and these lock away in place really easily. And as you can see here, you have a little storage bucket. Now you can lock this storage bucket out and actually use it as storage and put the seats down on top of it to hide valuables, or even just use it as a cargo separator back here. But you can just pull these tabs and this thing folds down flat and gives you a huge flat load area to store any items inside the car. And you can even use some space underneath the seats there to store any sort of smaller items as well. Now this looks really weird if you're living outside of Australia, because this is a right-hand drive F-150. These things leave the factory as a left-hand drive car, get shipped from Detroit down here to Australia, in Melbourne actually, and they get converted by a company called RMA Automotive. Now these guys have converted over 100,000 vehicles, and they have been working with Ford Australia since the late 90s. Now what they do here is they use 500 new parts to be able to convert this from a left-hand drive car into a right-hand drive car that looks like it rolled out of the factory as a right-hand drive vehicle. Now, there's been some key upgrades here, including the steering, the climate controls, the lighting systems, as well as the instrument panel, and there's been software upgrades to make sure that this works very well as a right-hand drive vehicle. Now, this whole process takes 22 hours over 3 days, and RMA is able to convert around 20 F-150s here in Australia every single day. And this is the only factory-backed right-hand drive conversion of the F-150 in the world. But conversions to right-hand drive is nothing new, and a bunch of different cars have been converted here, and there's been plenty of F-150s that have arrived in Australia and been converted to right-hand drive without any factory approval. They've just been imported by private importers. But here, this is a proper factory-backed, warranty-backed right-hand drive conversion from the brand itself. Now, what's kind of cool is that the price point of this vehicle actually isn't that much more than what it costs in the US, considering how much labor and parts go into this after it arrives in Australia. When it's a left-hand drive vehicle in the US, it costs just over about $100,000 for a short wheelbase version of the F-150 Lariat. You add a bit more on there for a long wheelbase. Now, if this gets brought into Australia, you're importing it, there's taxes, and you also need a bunch of new parts and labor to convert this to right-hand drive. And so at around $150,000, it's actually not too bad of a price to pay. But to be honest, yeah, it is a bit more than what you'd pay in the States, thanks to that extra labor that has to go into this car to be able to make it a right-hand drive vehicle. If you've been in the new Ranger, there's a bunch of stuff in here you've already seen, because a lot of the stuff from the F-150 made its way into the new Ranger. That includes a lot of storage in here, which is great. So you get a ton of storage in the doors and enough for big water bottles like this. But this big water bottle will not fit in these cup holders. They're just a bit too small, which is odd for an American vehicle. You get storage above the glove box. You have a decent sized glove box, but it's not massive, but you do have a huge center cubby area. And you also do get this little shelf here as well. You get a big touchscreen here, which shows off that this is the 75th anniversary of the F-150, because this was built in 2023. You get a digital instrument cluster here, which is really nice, and it's the one you get on the Ranger Platinum and the Ranger Raptor. You get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You've also got a bunch of controls here for your vehicle, but it's nothing too complicated. You got a lot of physical dials and knobs in here, so you got your volume and media controls. You have all your physical climate controls. You have heated and ventilated seats up front. We have a 12-volt adapter here. We have a USB Type A port and Type C port here, but we don't get any household AC plugs inside the F-150. We get this remanufactured shifter, which looks fantastic, and it's a custom part that's been made to mirror the look of the left-hand drive model, which looks really quite nice. You've also got a bunch of dials here for your Pro trailer controls. You've also got your brakes trailer controls here as well, and you have your drive modes and also your drivetrain controls for your 4x4 system. You get a single stalk here for your indicators, your lights, and your wipers. You get plenty of physical buttons here on this very large steering wheel, but you don't get a heads-up display. We have a little storage area above the screen, and we have nice stitching running on the doors and also on the dash. And there's some wood look trim in here, which looks good, but yes, does feel a little bit plasticky. Now, addressing the biggest concern you have, how's the build quality in here? Well, there's some plenty of cheap plastic materials in here, but there's also plenty of nice materials, but everything else feels very solid in here. Creaks and rattles are actually pretty minimal on the inside, which I was very impressed with. And it's pretty typical Ford build quality in here, which some people love and some people aren't really a big fan of. But to be honest, I'll say it feels like a nice tough truck with some luxury appointments in here. So it gets a big thumbs up from me. And another way to spend lots of hours in here is to use the interior desk feature. So you move your phone out of the cup holder so it doesn't get squished. You press this button, the shifter will go down, and you go, okay, why is it doing that? It's not for something that you might think, but instead it's for this. There's interior desk which you can use to type on. You can put your laptop on here. You can have your lunch in here if you're spending a lot of time inside this vehicle. And once you're done, you fold that away, you bring the shifter up, and you're ready to get driving, which I really like. And it's a good use of this enormous space here in the middle, which makes it feel like your passenger is in a different time zone. Perhaps one of the best features in here is how comfortable you can get at any height. So you have an electronically adjustable steering column, which which isn't too unusual in a car at this price point. But what is very unique is the fact you have a button here to adjust how far you want your brake and accelerator pedal to be away from your feet, which is very useful and very easy to use, and it's very easy to get comfortable in here if you're a shorter or taller driver. That's enough yapping about features, let's get driving. I'm heading into the big city, and that's where you're probably going to be most nervous driving an F-150. I've been living with the F-150 in the city for a little bit, but I'll be showing you what it's like to live with in just a second. First of all, we're driving on some open rural roads because this is where you should be driving an F-150. Out here you might have a property, you might have a caravan and space to park a big ute like this, and especially in long wheelbase form. Now I asked the farm owner of the farm I was filming on just then if he would buy one of these. He said no. I said why? He said his dual cab does mostly everything he needs to do. He doesn't do much more than towing and carrying, but he doesn't tow past 3.5 ton or get close to it. But if you're someone who gets close to 3.5 ton and wants that extra luxury of a 4.5 ton towing capacity, then that's when something like this would come in handy. Additionally, he said he doesn't carry people in the back seat. He said his dual cab ute has enough space for what he needs. Now, dual cab utes are a little bit compromised because they do have a smaller back seat, where this is ultra luxurious when it comes to space. When I first stepped into the F-150, I was a little nervous because this thing is huge, but what I learned quickly is that this car does wrap itself around you. In saying that, it doesn't feel as big as it should. Despite this having a massive amount of internal space, it does help that this vehicle is not as wide as it could be. The F-150 only feels marginally wider than a Ranger, so it's actually pretty easy to maneuver in your lane and not drift over or take up more than your lane on the road, which is pretty good. The other issue is turning radius. When you go for a turn, this thing is long, and that means that you will probably end up doing a 4-point turn. Now, if you are someone who will be towing more than 3.5 ton and do want a bit more space inside your ute, well, how does this thing drive? Well, this is a right-hand drive conversion, and it's using an adapted Ford Ranger Raptor steering rack, which is working really well, and this thing steers incredibly well for a right-hand drive converted car. And to be honest, it feels like this came out of Detroit exactly like this instead of being converted down in Melbourne. There's minimal wind noise as you're driving along here, and the insulation from the outside world is incredible. I love the fact that you can open these large windows up, and also your sunroof, and also that window at the back, and it creates for a nice open air driving experience, which is really unique in something like this. And I also love these dip down windows to give you extra visibility out the side of your vehicle. The mirrors do a great job of covering most of your blind spots, although this A-pillar does feel a little bit large when it comes to maneuvering through tight, twisty bends. The radar cruise control system in here feels well calibrated. It feels like it doesn't have any quirks or any weird things going on that you would expect in a right-hand drive converted car. This is my first right-hand drive converted car I've tested, and it's incredible the amount of work that goes behind the scenes on something like this and how well it's been executed in the F-150. I will put my hand up and say I am an original skeptic of right-hand drive converted cars as being good as factory cars, but this being factory backed, I would absolutely put my money here and be happy with this vehicle. The brakes are nice and pillowy as well. You've got 4 disc brakes here, and they work really well to smoothly bring you down to a stop, and it feels like you can control over 2 ton of metal here with ease. I love the digital instrument cluster as well. This big screen in the middle is great for Apple CarPlay. It's all I really use it for. And also, people give you a lot of space when you're merging as long as you give them enough notice, which is quite good. Now, taking sharper turns in this at speed is not advised. It is a lot of metal to move, and I did encounter some awkward tire squealing when I was turning it, so just be careful of that. But the safety systems in here are pretty good. There's nothing too over the top. You've got your autonomous emergency braking here. We've got auto lane keep assist and active lane keep assist. We also have blind spot monitoring. We have that 360-degree camera as well. It's really easy to maneuver such a large vehicle. Now, our on-road drive modes would include sport, towing, and we've also got a slippery mode and normal mode. I've been driving around normal mode most of the time. You can waken this thing up by turning it into sport mode, and that will make sure your shifts are nice and crisp in this 10-speed automatic gearbox, and it will give you far more response from that twin turbocharged V6 under the hood. You definitely don't need a V8 in your towing vehicle, because I will say this thing is averaging 13.3 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's, yes, on the thirsty side, but for a vehicle this size, wise, it's actually pretty good and impressive, I would say. And that's mainly because this is a twin turbocharged V6 motor. But if you would have a naturally aspirated V8 motor, you could expect to be filling up far more often than you would in an F-150. But obviously if you start to tow, that's when you start to throw out your fuel economy figures. But the radar cruise control does a really good job of operating in traffic and also out in the open road because it feels like a human is driving rather than a computer. Now the steering does require a little bit more input than a normal vehicle, but the variable ratio here does a really good job of tightening up when you're driving around at higher speeds. But something that is concerning is the hood height here. As you drive through a school zone, for example, it is worth noting that these larger hood heights in the US are killing more pedestrians every year. It's worth bringing up because as these vehicles become more popular here in Australia, it is something that will be a threat to pedestrians on the road, because if you hit someone with a Camry versus an F-150, they're more likely to survive the crash in a Camry at the same speed, regardless of how much the car weighs. The Camry could weigh as much as this F-150, but it actually comes down to hood height, which is the strongest determining factor if someone is to survive a pedestrian impact. Now, what I like about Ford's 4x4 system here in the F-150 is that you can drive around in full automatic rather than just two-wheel drive, so that's good if you're driving in the rain or you just want a bit of extra grip when you're putting power down, so that's kind of cool. And I will say the sound from that V6 does sound pretty good. So if you're driving this for long distances, it would be ideal, but what about driving this in the city? Here we are in one of the largest CBDs here in Australia. We're here in North Sydney. We're going to be driving through some back roads to sort of show off what this is like to daily drive if you live in an urban environment like a city. Now, I'll tell you now, this is not the car to own if you live in the CBD. Unless you have good off-street parking or you're have pretty generous street parking, yeah, that's fine. But going into the city and driving tight streets is not the best way to spend your time in an F-150. I found that parking in my streets, I'm taking up 2 car spaces easily where 2 small hatchbacks could fit, and that might be a problem for people around your area if parking is at a premium. Now, you rarely do get cars cutting you off, but in some instances, they see you as a bigger, larger car, so they think they can get around you. But they don't really know that you do have 400 horsepower at your disposal, so use that as you wish. But the thing I've found that's the biggest advantage for the F-150 is its width. It's not that wide, so it's actually pretty easy to drive through these skinnier back streets. Braking in this thing is actually fine, and I feel really comfortable and actually quite isolated from what's happening around me, which is a good thing. So you're not getting involved in the day-to-day stressful traffic run, and instead, having a pretty relaxed time, and you don't really feel like you have to rush anywhere because you're in comfort already. It's not like you're in an uncomfortable car and you need to get out of it. But what's good is that the F-150 has great visibility, so I can see out, and despite this having a very large bonnet, it's actually got a bit of a rake to it, so I can see a lot what's happening in front of me. Obviously taking it slow around areas where I might drive a bit faster because this is a larger vehicle, and also when you come up to a pedestrian crossing or having people cross in front of you, you just want to make it more obvious that you're slowing down, because this thing looks huge when it's hurtling towards anyone at any speed. But what I will say is that this does turn heads. You'll have kids pointing at this car thinking it looks awesome, and you'll have a whole bunch of other people just sort of looking at it going, what is that? Especially in this rapid red paint. Now, making turns, pretty easy. This is a very long car, but the steering rack does a great job of just sort of giving you a lot of turn with not too much input from the steering wheel relative to how much you're turning. To me, the biggest downside of owning this truck in the city is parking. You can't go into any parking structures under the threat that you might have a too tight of a turn to make in that parking structure. You can clear some taller parking structures because it's actually not that tall, but the length might get you stuck in an awkward position. So I don't even bother going in there. It's way too stressful, and it's pretty inconvenient if you do get stuck for other people. So instead, I look for street parking if I can. Now, you can't park in a 45-degree angle car park because usually those are quite close to the road, and you'll have the back half of your car sticking out of the road, which is again a danger to your car and other people. So that sort of rules out most 45-degree parking. So that really leaves you with parallel parking. And parallel parking is fine, but then you need about 2.5 spaces to be able to maneuver something this big into a spot. And then occasionally you will have to take up a bit more space in a parallel parking situation, and you don't want to give too much space to someone else because you might have someone squeeze in, but then the issue is you might have someone block you in and you won't be able to move out. So then you sort of have to take a bit more space than you might visually need, but you do need that to be able to maneuver out of that car space. And that's when people kind of get pissed off because they see your car taking up a lot of room and they aren't really a fan of that, especially if parking is a premium in your area. And the ride around the city is actually really comfortable. This is a very, very comfortable ute, and I can see why a lot of people might opt for something like this over maybe an SUV. You can sort of get a nice comfortable SUV experience and a truck in one big vehicle. And so can you live with this in the city? Yeah, but is it advised? I would absolutely not recommend this to you if you do live in the city, and if you live in an apartment especially, or a townhouse, it's even worse. But if you have a house, you might be able to make it work. Now, the 3 reasons why you would buy this instead of a dual cab ute include the fact that you can tow more with it, you have a larger bed, and you have more space on the inside. But if a normal dual cab ute already does that for you, you probably don't need to buy an F-150. Although I will admit, I love driving this thing.